Hello, everyone, and welcome again to Weathersfield Proctor Library Storytime. I'm Glenna Coleman, Youth Services Librarian, and here's our pal Library Bear, back to read you some more stories. You know, it's been really extra cold of late, and on days like that when you can't go outside, what better to do than stay inside and make something? So, I have a couple of stories for you today about making things. Our first story about making things is called Extra Yarn, and this is by Mac Barnett with illustrations by Jon Klassen. If you look on the cover, you can tell that there's a lot of extra yarn there. Here we go. Extra Yarn by Mac Barnett, illustrated by Jon Klassen. Look at that, we even have yarn around the information here. Coming from this box. On a cold afternoon, in a cold little town, where everywhere you looked was either the white of snow or the black of soot from chimneys, Annabelle found a box filled with yarn of every color. So, she went home and knit herself a sweater. And when Annabelle was done, she had some extra yarn. So, she knit a sweater for Mars, too. But there was still extra yarn. And when Annabelle and Mars went for a walk, Nate pointed and laughed and said, "You two look ridiculous." "You're just jealous," said Annabelle. "No, I'm not," said Nate. But it turned out he was. And even after she'd made a sweater for Nate and his dog, and for herself and for Mars, she still had extra yarn. At school, Annabelle's classmates could not stop talking about her sweater. "Quiet!" ordered Mr. Norman. "Quiet, everyone. Annabelle, that sweater of yours is a terrible distraction. I cannot teach with everyone turning around to look at you." "Then I'll knit one for everyone," Annabelle said, "so they won't have to turn around." "Impossible," said Mr. Norman. "You can't." But it turned out she could. And she did. Even for Mr. Norman. And when she was done, Annabelle still had extra yarn. So she knit sweaters for her mom and dad, and for Mr. Pendleton, and Mrs. Pendleton, and for Dr. Palmer, and even for little Louie. She made sweaters for everyone except Mr. Crabtree, who never wore sweaters or even long pants, and who would stand in his shorts with the snow up to his knees. "No sweater for me, thanks," said Mr. Crabtree. So she made Mr. Crabtree a hat, and even then, Annabelle still had extra yarn. She made sweaters for all the dogs and all the cats, and for other animals too. But some people thought soon Annabelle will run out of yarn. But it turned out she didn't. So Annabelle made sweaters for things that didn't even wear sweaters. Things began to change in that little town. News spread of this remarkable girl who never ran out of yarn, and people came to visit from around the world to see all the sweaters and to shake Annabelle's hand. One day, an archduke who was very fond of clothes sailed across the sea and demanded to see Annabelle. You see him with his feathers on his hat there on the ship. "Little girl," said the Archduke, "I would like to buy that miraculous box of yarn, and I am willing to offer you $1,000,000. "No, thank you," said Annabelle, who was knitting a sweater for a pickup truck. The Archduke's mustache twitched. "2,000,000, he said. Annabelle shook her head. "No, thanks." "10,000,000, shouted the Archduke. "Take it or leave it." "Leave it," said Annabelle. "I won't sell the yarn." And she didn't. So that night, the Archduke hired 3 robbers to break into Annabelle's house, and they stole the box and took it to the Archduke, who set off across the snow and sailed over the sea back to his castle. The Archduke put on his favorite song and sat in his best chair. Then he took out the box and lifted its lid, and he looked inside. His mustache quivered. It shivered. It trembled. The Archduke hurled the box out the window and shouted, "Little girl, I curse you with my family's curse. You will never be happy again." Oh, wow, that sounds terrible. You see the box? It turned out she was. Well, I hope you enjoyed the story Extra Yarn by Mac Barnett, illustrated by Jon Klassen. That's quite a story about making things, isn't it? Well, we have another story about making things for you today, and this one is called The Paper Crane. This is by Molly Bang. A man once owned a restaurant on a busy road. He loved to cook good food, and he loved to serve it. He worked from morning until night, and he was happy. But a new highway was built close by. Travelers drove straight from one place to another and no longer stopped at the restaurant. Many days went by when no guests came at all. The man became very poor and had nothing to do but dust and polish his empty plates and tables. One evening, a stranger came into the restaurant. His clothes were old and worn, but he had an unusual, gentle manner. Though he said he had no money to pay for food, the owner invited him to sit down. He cooked the best meal he could make and served him like a king. When the stranger had finished, he said to his host, "I cannot pay you with money, but I would like to thank you in my own way." He picked up a paper napkin from the table and folded it into the shape of a crane. "You have only to clap your hands," he said, "and this bird will come to life and dance for you. Take it and enjoy it while it is with you." With these words, the stranger left. It happened just as the stranger had said. The owner had only to clap his hands, and the paper crane became a living bird, flew down to the floor and danced. Soon, word of the dancing crane spread, and people came from far and near to see the magic bird perform. The owner was happy again, for his restaurant was always full of guests. He cooked and served and had company from morning until night. The weeks passed, and the months. One evening, a man came into the restaurant. His clothes were old and worn, but he had an unusual gentle manner. The owner knew him at once and was overjoyed. The stranger, however, said nothing. He took a flute from his pocket, raised it to his lips, and began to play. The crane flew down from its place on the shelf and danced as it had never danced before. The stranger finished playing, lowered the flute from his lips, and returned it to his pocket. He climbed on the back of the crane, and they flew out of the door and away. The restaurant still stands by the side of the road, and guests still come to eat the good food and hear the story of the gentle stranger and the magic crane made from a paper napkin. But neither the stranger nor the dancing crane has ever been seen again. Well, I hope you enjoyed the story of the paper crane by Molly Bang. Thanks for coming to Weathersfield Proctor Library Storytime. I'm Glenna Coleman, Youth Services Librarian. Library Bear and I will see you again next time. Bye.